For a span of 100 days in 1994, the nation of Rwanda in Africa experienced a horrific and brutal mass murder campaign. The conflict tore apart the region, pitting neighbor against neighbor and resulting in the deaths of over 1/10 of the country's population. The roots of this conflict can be traced back a century earlier when German and later Belgian colonizers arrived in Rwanda. At that time, the country was ruled by a Tutsi monarchy, one of the three ethnic groups in the population. The Tutsi and Twa communities were minority groups, while the Hutu constituted the majority. Although many Hutus and Tutsi civilians maintained amicable relationships, the colonial powers fostered political division. The Belgians enforced record-keeping based on ethnic identity and propagated a narrative that portrayed the Tutsi as elite rulers and the Hutu as ordinary farmers. Over time, this propaganda fueled intense political hostility. Even though the colonial powers had largely withdrawn by 1959, the lingering resentment led to a Hutu revolt, forcing many Tutsi leaders to flee the country. In the subsequent decade, Rwanda transitioned to an independent republic with a Hutu government. This new administration argued that as the majority group, the Hutu deserved exclusive access to political power. They excluded the Tutsi minority by implementing policies based on population and prevented the return of Tutsi families who had fled earlier. Hutu extremists disseminated propaganda blaming the Tutsi for the country's economic, social, and political challenges. In 1990, a small group of Tutsi insurgents invaded Rwanda, sparking a violent civil war. The conflict lasted 3 years until a formal peace accord was reached. However, the aftermath of the war was plagued by insecurity. While some civilians in both groups maintained friendly relations, the peace treaty exacerbated political polarization. In 1994, when the plane carrying the Hutu Rwandan president was shot down, the conflict reignited. This time, Hutu officials had orchestrated a deadly response to secure their hold on power. Government-funded Hutu militias flooded the streets, carrying out acts of physical and sexual violence against Tutsi political opponents and civilians. Over the following chaotic months, more than 1 million Hutu civilians joined their ranks under coercion, self-preservation, or personal agendas. Tutsi victims sought refuge in churches and schools, hoping that international organizations would protect them, but no outside assistance came. UN soldiers who were responsible for overseeing the peace accord were ordered to abandon Tutsi civilians, and UN leadership refused to acknowledge the ongoing genocide. The violence persisted until mid-July when the Tutsi army, who had instigated the previous civil war, took control of the country. By the end of the conflict, approximately 800,000 Rwandans had been killed, leaving only a small fraction of the Tutsi population alive. In the subsequent months, bringing the perpetrators to justice posed a significant challenge. The UN established a special tribunal in Tanzania to try the key individuals responsible for the atrocities. However, Hutu civilians from all levels of society had participated in the violence, targeting their neighbors, friends, and even family members. Approximately 120,000 Rwandans awaited trial, and overcrowding and poor hygiene in the prisons resulted in inmate deaths. The new Rwandan government estimated that it would take 100 years to prosecute every accused civilian through the national court system. Consequently, officials decided to turn to the country's traditional conflict resolution process known as Gakaka, which translates to justice on the grass. Gakaka had traditionally been employed to address offenses within villages. Under this adapted system, local witnesses provided testimony and spoke in favor of or against the accused. Lay judges appointed by the community determined an appropriate penalty based on the available information. These hybrid trials lacked professional attorneys or judges and relied solely on oral testimonies and case files detailing the accused crimes. Charges were categorized into 4 groups: masterminding the genocide, committing acts of sexual violence, participating in killings and physical assault, or destroying Tutsi property. Perpetrators found guilty of the first 2 categories were referred to the traditional court system, while those involved in the other crimes faced predetermined penalties that could be reduced if they pleaded guilty. From 2002 onwards, thousands of Gacaca courts convened weekly, providing a faster alternative to conventional courts. However, Rwandan public opinion on these trials was mixed. Some individuals hesitated to accuse their neighbors within a community setting, and many potential witnesses were intimidated to withhold their testimony. Furthermore, while the trials demonstrated that not all Hutus participated in the killings, they solely focused on cases involving Tutsi victims, disregarding the Hutu casualties during the genocide and preceding civil war. In 2012, when the trials concluded, the courts had convicted 1.7 million individuals. These verdicts brought a sense of restored dignity to some families affected by the violence, but for others, the trials served as a decade-long reminder of a painful past they desperately wanted to move beyond.